everything. I started working on .NET applications. I did that for around 6, 7 years. And then, along the way, I started looking at different jobs and kept seeing things come up for Salesforce and started looking into it more and more and more and thought it made sense as a different career path. So now I've been working in Salesforce for 3 to 4 years after switching from .NET.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks for your presentation. And I think everyone wants to know, why did you decide to become a Salesforce System Architect?
I liked that Salesforce seemed to have the certification paths where you can kind of show your knowledge, because they usually pick up on things pretty quickly. And I thought that made it a little less scary for me switching careers, because I already had so many years of experience in .NET that I almost didn't switch because I thought it would be harder to find good jobs when I had less experience. But then I saw the different career paths and the architect path, and the system path made the most sense for me because I was already doing a lot of very similar work in .NET to the system architect path. I just really needed to learn the Salesforce knowledge and learn the platform and everything as it relates to Salesforce.
Yeah, that makes sense. And well, to start talking more about this awesome career path, we have a question for all you guys. Have you obtained the Salesforce Platform Developer 1 certification? Here I'm gonna share the link so you can go and choose your answer. Because as you were saying, Travis, this is like a very important certification to get started to this career path, right?
Yeah, this is more the basics of the Salesforce platform. It's probably a good spot for anyone to get started.
Yeah, exactly. So wait, let's see the answer. Okay, apparently we have 50% yes and the other no. So that's interesting. Okay, so we can continue talking about this career path. And Travis, for you, what was the most challenging part of getting these certifications?
Specifically, the identity certification was the most challenging for me. It was just because I hadn't really had a lot of past experience in that area. Whenever I started getting into CMO and SSO really in depth, so I wasn't just learning Salesforce and how to apply that to something that I already had knowledge in, but I was having to do a lot of research just to expand my knowledge in a different area. And then also the Platform Developer 1, I know it's what everybody starts with, but that was all new material for me as well. So I just had to spend a lot of time learning Salesforce, making sure that I knew the basics of Salesforce well before I moved on into more in-depth topics.
For you, Travis, what was the most challenging part of getting all these certifications?
I was working at the same time, so a lot of it was finding the time to study, because sometimes I was working in a really particular area, and then I still had to find the time to study things outside of my day-to-day work, because I wasn't using all these different areas that were in the exams. So just finding the time, staying motivated. After going through the developer 1, it started getting to where I just had to spend more time on specific things. So I just set aside some time every day just to keep going through the Salesforce recommended material.
And if you were doing it over again, what would you do differently?
I would probably do it pretty similar, I think. Start with the developer 1, learn all the basics, and then move on through the different areas, focusing on one at a time. I kind of focused on everything at once. So I guess if there's one thing I would maybe do different, it would be more to drill down into one area at a time. I was sort of trying to learn it all at one time, kind of jumping into a different career path and wanted to know it all. And sometimes it made it where it was it would get a little more confusing instead of just focusing in on one topic at a time.
Yeah, I'm talking about the resources. how did you prepare to study for all these certification, like this 4 certification? What resources do you recommend?
I really just followed the Salesforce recommendations. If you look at like their trails, they have trailheads with recommended paths of study. The developer one's really nice because they actually have, guided with examples where you're actually hands-on doing things and then getting feedback along the way. So that one was probably the easiest to study for as far as having good content where you had a really good guide to go by. If you follow the developer one trail, it really prepares you well for that. And then in the other exams, they have content as well. Some of them have trails, but a lot of them is links to PDFs, links to documentation, and some of it's stuff that you're not going to be able to read the entire thing. It might be 100+ page, some sort of technical documentation, but I always just try to scan through it, find all the important parts, and study it as much as I can.
I'm talking about the integration architect. Sorry, I can read it. The integration architecture designer. What resources do you use to start studying for this one?
For the integration one, I followed, it's exactly what you have pulled up really. I just went through all the Salesforce recommended material. There were some trails where you actually went in, set up connected apps and went into an org, like a playground similar to the developer one. And then there was a lot of documentation. So the integrations, a lot of this exam is knowing the best practices, not just how you would do it in Salesforce. This one probably came the easiest to me, only because it was what I'd had the most prior experience in. But there's a lot of different links, kind of almost like a flow chart to different paths you could take based on the customer's requirements. So a big part of this exam is you'll be given a scenario where the customer will have different systems they have data in, and they'll access this data in different ways and capture the data in different ways. And you have to be able to understand the requirements. And then from that, best recommend the way to do integrations. It could be something like we ETL the data and load it nightly into Salesforce. Maybe the data never goes into Salesforce. If we could just use connectors and external objects and keep the data outside of Salesforce, or maybe we're loading the data in real time. So it's just being able to evaluate what that customer has in place to decide what's best.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So it wasn't too hard for you, right? This one?
No, not because of my prior work in similar fields of different types of integrations, seeing what works best and what doesn't based on different situations. But if someone hasn't worked with it a lot, then it would be a lot of studying the charts, recommendations as far as ETLs or real-time data loads, and also you need to understand some of the limitations of Salesforce as a platform, just to understand that it might not be practical to actually load the data in real time. We may not be able to push that many records into Salesforce, that kind of thing.
Talking about the next one, the identity and access management designer, how was it for you?
This one was the hardest for me because this is one I didn't really have much prior experience in. Most places I had worked had a different team as far as like a server team that would manage everything as far as SSO and all the configurations. So I hadn't really worked a lot with, even like SAML and understanding what actually is in a SAML assertion. Because this exam breaks down details as far as, service and identity provider and what's actually involved in that handshaking for authentication. And that was something that, in the past had usually been configured for me by more of a server team. So I had to actually learn the concepts as well. I couldn't really bring past knowledge into this one. But one of the big things is also evaluating what the customer has in place already to know what the best way to do this would be, whether it's using single sign-on or if it's just having Salesforce logins for all the users. You just need to see what the customer already has in place. Do they already use Azure maybe? And they're already using single sign-on with other applications? Like, are you always redirecting to and from Salesforce and you need to have that seamless experience between applications? Or can you just use Salesforce logins? So just kind of understanding the basics and then being able to understand the customer's needs.
So do you think the Salesforce Platform Developer one give you like the basic stuff to then start learning this one, like help you?
It's not that relevant to this one, honestly. The developer one's a lot more on the actual development and more like the UI, what the customer's going to see, whether that's declarative, which is going to be more like your flows, process builders, or if that's custom code and things like web components or Aura components. That's more where the developer's focused. These exams, like the designer exams, do tend to get onto a path that's a little bit specialized, not necessarily building on the generic Salesforce.
Yes. And well, and how was the development lifecycle and deployment designer certification?
This one also was one I was really familiar with. I'd worked at enterprise companies before, large development teams of 20 plus users pretty regularly doing development. So as far as what this one focuses on, just to give a little overview of it first, it's a lot of your actual development lifecycle, meaning how you take something from development to production and the steps that are involved in that. So it doesn't get super detailed into branching strategies, but just the general idea of working on something in development, and then this needs to move to testing in some sort of stable test environment, a UAT or a QA environment, and then it needs to be deployed to production. There's different methods you can do that. Again, this really is based on the customer's needs also. Some smaller orgs, they might have 1-2 developers. Their requirements are going to be a little bit different. They don't need to have merge conflicts from a lot of people working on the same thing at one time, and they might not necessarily need such an in-depth CI/CD pipeline. They just need to move things from one environment to the next. And then you might have some customers that have regular development going on where they need more of an automated pipeline where they check the code in and then it gets deployed automatically using something like Jenkins. And then that gets more complex, but the idea is the same. We work on something in development, either in a sandbox or a scratch org, and then we have to pull those changes, check them in somewhere, and then have them deployed somewhere else.
And Travis, talking about this for certification, for you, what was the one that you like most?
As far as an exam goes, like I liked the integration. I like the data and having to see all the requirements and what would work the best. It's just something I've always been interested in, and I do like that. I like understanding different things Salesforce has available to make an application work as fast as possible, to understand ways that we can deal with data, whether that's in Salesforce or out of Salesforce, to put together the most responsive applications. So that's just an interest of mine. And then the coding side of things, also implementing things like mocking for unit testing and best practices for coding, just to bring a little bit more enterprise best practices to Salesforce instead of the typical, it seems like a lot of Salesforce development, it's really separated and it's not so much modeled in like an MVC type model, and unit testing I see very often with customers is pretty lacking. So that's something I was interested in, was coming up with good repeatable ways to train people on that.
And Travis, I have a question, like, how would you describe the work of a Salesforce System Architect? Like, how is your daily work?
It's a lot of the same kind of thing as in the exams, really, where the exams have a lot of general, where you have to understand the requirements of the customer and then determine what's the best way to actually have the implementation meet the customer's needs. That's a big part of it. Sometimes it's almost BA work in that the customer will present you with something. You'll have to understand what they're presenting the best way possible, and then maybe there's something with the data requirement, something that stands out, and you need to know when to ask those questions about, well, maybe how many sales orders do you have in an hour, or something like that. Like if they want all their sales orders in Salesforce, then you'll need to ask, are we dealing with really large volumes? Are other systems accessing those orders also? So maybe if something's stored in ERP, do we already have a lot of existing applications accessing them? And then how real time do these all need to be in sync and things like that. So that would be like a typical situation. There's the development side of things too. Anywhere, whether it's CI/CD pipelines or it's just best practices, anything that may come up to guide the development teams the best way.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And for you, Travis, what can you recommend? Like, what is the best advice you can give others if they want to follow also this career path?
I think one of the biggest things is to take the time to make sure that you understand the material well. This slide shows. So, don't get caught up on having like a certain date for the certifications and trying to just find what's the most heavily weighted part of the exam and just study that and learn that really well, and then leave out some of the important details. That's one of the biggest things that I could say is if you want to be successful in the workforce also, and not just get the certification, make sure that you actually understand the content well. That way when you're asked questions, and you can guide the discussions, understand the material. So that's one of the biggest things that I would say is just don't get in too big of a hurry. If there's something that you think that you need to take a little more time on than maybe you had originally planned, then just take that time, because in the end, you're getting the certification for a job, really. It's to further your career path. So you need to make sure that you understand the content well. That way you'll be successful in your career.
Thanks for the recommendation, Travis. I think we have a couple of minutes for a question that I was reading in the chat that we have some. So, but before, while we're talking about the career paths here, you can start sending your questions in the chat. But I want to mention that we have, if you can check our website and check our open positions. Currently, we have offices around Bolivia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Uruguay, Peru, and West Virginia. So you can apply there and see all our open positions. But now let's continue to the questions. Here we have some I want to read. Well, Santiago asked, was the Salesforce recommended material enough to prepare?
Yeah, I think it was. Sometimes it's a little overwhelming though. I know I just said make sure you understand the content well, but don't get too discouraged if some of the details seem like a little too much to memorize, because when you get into the designer certifications in particular, there will be a lot of very, very detailed content. So just having a general understanding of everything. And if you have a good general understanding of all the articles Salesforce links out to for each of the designer certifications, then you should be okay on the exam. Some of the exams do get probably more specific than what you would ever actually be in a working situation, like the identity exam in particular. So there is a lot of those things that you have to memorize, but yeah, I think that if you have a good understanding of all the content, you should be okay.
Thanks, Travis. We have another one. Christian also asked, is System Architect a prerequisite for another certification, or is it the end of the career path?
There is a Salesforce Certified Technical Architect. So the way Salesforce Architect certifications currently work, we have a system and an application architect path. Each of those have the 4 exams that are a prerequisite. And there's not a separate exam for system or application architect. It's once you get the 4 prerequisites, then you're considered a system or an application architect. And once you have system and application architect certifications, then you can go for the technical architect. The technical architect's a little different. There's not an exam as far as like questions and answers that you go online to take. It's actually like sitting in front of a board of Salesforce certified technical architects. Like they said that there were 5 of them. And then it's more of a presented with a scenario, and then they'll ask you questions about your solution that you present, and then decide whether you should be considered, basically one of them, a technical architect as well.
And do you recommend to follow some particular order in certification trail?
Not necessarily on the developer side or like on the designer side, but the platform developer I probably would do first, because the other exams, they're so specific that as far as in like the workforce, you're not likely to be focused on just one thing. It's possible. I've seen some jobs come up like integration architect, but even that, typically you're going to have a lot of questions come up where you need to understand the basics of Salesforce. Also, you do need to understand the objects, the different types of fields and sharing. And I think that developer exam really gives you all the basics, and at least you'll have more of an understanding of Salesforce in general. So I would start with that one. And then as far as the others, really none of them build on the other. They're all 3 separate topics.
Yeah. How much time did it take you to get system architect certified? Well, I know that it depends, right?
Yeah, it was a little different for me. I mean, it took me 1 year, which is probably a little unique. I think Salesforce says typical 3 to 5 years and working with the Salesforce platform. But I jump started things a little bit because, like I said, I didn't have to learn as much of the actual architecture, like the background knowledge for best practices, because I already had experience with that in the past. So I was really just learning the Salesforce platform and how to put that together into Salesforce. Part of it, and it's really going to depend how much time you have to study it, what your regular work is. If your everyday job involves a lot of different things that are on the exam, then you're going to gain that knowledge quicker, I feel like, also. So it would really just depend person to person.
Also, we have another question. As an architect, what other certifications or technologies would you recommend learning to be a well-rounded Salesforce architect?
As far as the certifications in Salesforce goes, there is like the consultant certifications for different particular areas, like the cloud, which is going to be like, and then there's going to be your communities, which they call them experiences now, but you could get those to have more of a knowledge of Salesforce and the technologies that they offer. And then also, it's kind of hard if you're working in Salesforce to do it, but having some understanding of other databases and other systems customers would use would help, even if it's just reading some articles, seeing what's out there, and how you would integrate that with Salesforce. I think that MuleSoft is something I've been seeing a lot lately. I've been studying MuleSoft quite a bit because so many customers in Salesforce seem to be using it now. So anything like that popular tool that most of your customers are using. It could depend on what area you work in. Also, if you work in a particular industry, then maybe there's something that everyone in that industry is using, SAP or something like that. But I think the big thing is just having a really good understanding of the Salesforce platform, but then also just the fundamentals, because those fundamentals can be applied to anything. The customer starts talking about their Java or .NET application or whatever, they're still going to be using the same basic fundamentals of getting data in and out of the application. And just having an understanding of that would really help.
Great. Also, have you used other materials besides the Trailhead from Salesforce?
I did for a little bit, nothing in particular. Right before I took the exam, I did look at some practice exams and just kind of see what I was expecting. And I found some of them seemed to be pretty relevant, and then some of them were kind of dated. You have to be careful because some of the answers on them, I knew whenever I saw them, they seemed wrong. And then I looked and looked and I found that you'll actually find some material floating around with bad information too. So you kind of have to be careful what sources you use, but anything to get an idea of what to expect can sort of help you prepare. But ultimately, when I took the exams, and I think it was just kind of a nervous thing going looking for practice exams. Whatever was in the trailhead, if you have a good understanding of that, you'll be fine whenever you get to the questions in the exam.
Yeah, that's perfect. The last question. What makes a good Salesforce system architect?
I think the ability to do the things that we've discussed as far as understanding the customer's requirements and how you would translate those into actual functional tasks. And then also, consulting is a big part of it. It's almost like you're a consultant within the company that you work for sometimes. So, like with Octana as a consulting company, but a lot of the time the architects are almost consultants within that company. So being able to work with others well, and it's really important to you're not just going to be given a task just to kind of sit back and work for a month doing this development. It's a lot of hands-on, being able to, actually communicate well. That's a big thing too. Communicating well with whether it's the people you're working with or the customers, to be able to give the best advice on things. Taking your time. Another thing is not jumping to things too quickly. Always investigate something. If you have any questions about it, it's okay to say that you need to look into it. Just tell someone, I'm going to do a little research on it and I'll get back to you this evening, or I'll get back to you tomorrow on it. So there's always new things coming out. Somebody mentioned something that you kind of have a question about, just research that, stay current. I think that's a lot of it too. A lot of the job is just reading and staying current on all the new things available.
Thanks, Travis. Thanks for your advice. And I think that's all the questions we have for now. But before we end, it will be really helpful if you can share with us some topics you might be interested, so we can plan our next session. I'm gonna share also the link here, so you can share your answers.
MuleSoft and DevOps is two of the big things now.
Yes.
So something like MuleSoft would be great as far as things that could help with making you a better Salesforce architect.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can do like a second part, because months ago we have like the first webinar about MuleSoft, so it could be a good idea to have like a second part. But well, oh, okay. Application architect, nice. W. Well, they're coming more options. Thanks, guys. Thanks for your ideas. That's going to be very useful for us, so we're gonna start planning our next session. But I think for now, that's all. Thanks, Travis. Thanks for your time. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We are going to record. We are recording this. We're going to upload this to YouTube, so you can check that again. So thanks, everyone, and see you in the next session.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.